A moonlit manor stands amidst a torrential downpour, its windows glowing as if to hide the secrets within. Clad in black, guests weep and whisper through the halls, their grief heavy and pervasive in the gloom. From behind the heavy curtains, cruel whispers spread rumors of an illegitimate heir and a scandalous opera singer. Nina, a young member of the Black Knight Order, listens with a sharp, disgusted gaze as the gossip flows. She watches Adrian closely, his silence as he reads under the window only adding to the room's tension. When Adrian compares her temper to another's, Nina explodes with frustration at the malicious nonsense filling the air. Adrian Lacan Lavoine remains remarkably composed, his role as captain and heir weighing heavily on his young shoulders. Nina sighs, reminding Adrian that they bear no guilt for the tragic death of the Duchess's son. Though Nina fumes with protective rage, she worries for her childhood friend amid the dangerous succession drama of House Lavoine. Long ago, Gerald and Aiden held the stronger claims to the title, leaving Adrian in their shadows. The Duke's sudden passing left the inheritance unsettled, thrusting Adrian into a direct, perilous line of succession. The family's stability shattered when Gerald, the eldest legitimate son, died suddenly and violently. In a crimson-stained memory, the grieving Duchess cradles her dead son, her gaze sharpening into a thirst for vengeance. Back in the present, Nina's irritation boils over as Adrian maintains a calm, almost detached focus on his book. The small knight paces in a huff, wondering how her mild-mannered friend will survive the cold realities of the world. A bzzz sounding, Nina recalls staying by Adrian's side at Silver Lake Castle while others retreated, a playful pact made. Adrian's eyes harden with hidden intent. He has unfinished business that requires him to stay within these walls. A sudden knock-knock sounding on the door startles them, breaking the quiet tension with an ominous summons. An unwelcome messenger appears, prompting Nina to question the timing of this unexpected visit. The messenger explains that the Duchess has prepared tea and expects Adrian's presence immediately. Behind her veil, the Duchess waits like a spider in a web, her invitation carrying a deadly weight. The tea room is stiff with ceremony as Adrian sits across from the mourning Duchess under the watchful eyes of guards. With a graceful pour, she offers tea, her words smooth but her intentions shrouded in dark grief. A heavy silence settles over the table as Nina stands guard, her eyes never leaving the Duchess. The Duchess speaks of their shared past, her voice drifting as she reveals she has been contemplating their relationship. Adrian offers his condolences for her loss, while behind him, Nina's suspicion manifests as a dark, protective aura. A thin, mocking smile touches the Duchess's lips as she thanks Adrian for his supposed understanding. Sensing a trap, Nina lunges forward and snatches the teacup away before Adrian can take a single sip. Her reflection in the amber liquid is steady. She is certain that this gesture of hospitality is a death sentence. To protect her friend, Nina drains the tea in one defiant gulp, the liquid burning as it goes down. Adrian's cry of "Nina!" echoes through the room as she reels from the immediate, violent effects of the poison. Nina staggers, blood blooming from her mouth, as the empty cup falls from her trembling fingers. Collapsing into Adrian's arms, the young knight reels from a pain far more agonizing than she ever imagined. A wet cough sounding, Nina struggles to breathe while the Duchess watches with a cold, unmoved expression. The Duchess's cruelty knows no bounds as she dismisses the dying guard and tells Adrian to finish his tea. A guard's laughter rings out as he drags Adrian away from Nina, forcing him toward the Duchess's whims. Adrian is shoved back into his seat, leaving Nina bleeding on the floor as the guards surround them. Head bowed and shadows crossing his face, the quiet young master finally reaches his breaking point. An eerie violet glow ignites around Adrian's hand as heavy, spectral chains manifest from the void. His eyes burn with pink fire as he calls upon the darkness, his true power finally awakening. Crimson energy and violet blades erupt, a command to tear his enemies apart, echoing through the room. Skeletal monsters lunge from the shadows, their chains rattling with a terrifying KNH sounding as they seize the guards. The room descends into chaos as guards scream in terror, their weapons useless against the unstoppable undead horde. Adrian holds the unconscious Nina close, ignoring the Duchess's screeching outrage at his sudden, monstrous display of power. With a final, blinding surge of magic, Adrian prepares to sweep aside those who dared to hurt his friend. Through the torrential rain, Adrian carries the pale Nina to safety, his face a mask of desperate resolve. Hovering on the edge of consciousness, Nina wonders if Adrian made it out, her vision blurring as the world fades. Internal fire and ice clash within Nina, the poison's agony manifesting as a chaotic swirl of magical energy. Frosty spirits and ethereal butterflies gather around her heart, desperately fighting to slow the toxin's lethal spread. Nina sinks into a cold, dreaming slumber, drifting deep beneath a mental glacier, as her strength fails completely. Amidst a swirling cosmic void, Nina feels her consciousness slipping as memories of the past suddenly flood back. Her thoughts drift to a young version of herself, marking the day her life changed forever. Despite their poverty, the family lived an ordinary, peaceful life in a small cottage nestled in the countryside. They survived by farming in a slash-and-burn village where every meal was earned with a full day's labor. Though life was hard, Nina was a happy child, cherished as the youngest daughter of two kind parents. Their happiness shattered when a carriage accident claimed her parents, leaving the young siblings devastated and alone. On her 5th birthday, the trauma triggered a deluge of memories from another world, leaving Nina utterly bewildered. Visions of a past life, filled with beauty and grace, brought tears to the young girl's eyes. In these memories, she saw herself reading peacefully in sunlit meadows, surrounded by a world far different from her own. However, the conflicting memories of both lives soon became tangled, overwhelming her fragile young mind. In the kitchen, Nina's older sister drops a dish as a sudden, pained "ah" sound escapes the child. Nina collapses to the floor, clutching her head and screaming as the mental chaos reaches a violent peak. When her worried sister tries to comfort her, Nina pushes her away, desperately demanding to be left alone. In a fit of confusion, the child cries out that she is not Nina and doesn't belong here. Stumbling away from her siblings, the girl begs to be sent back to her original world as they watch helplessly. Nina sprints away from their humble home, ignoring the cries of the village elders who watch her in shock. Months pass, and the villagers whisper that the girl has gone mad, even after a shaman attempted to heal her. Tears stream down her face as she runs, the burden of 2 lives proving too heavy for a child to bear. Nina huddles alone under a gnarled tree at twilight, whispering of a past identity that no one else understands. Curled into a ball, she sobs in the fading light until the sound of approaching footsteps breaks the silence. Her older brother finds her in the woods, his face etched with worry as he searches for his sister. He carries her home, and despite his own bleeding foot, he offers a gentle laugh and excuses his clumsiness. Nina leans against his shoulder, her eyes softening as she begins to recognize the depth of his sibling love. Their older sister meets them at sunset, expressing her immense relief that Nina has finally come home safely. The older sister gazes tenderly at Nina, her presence providing a much-needed sense of peace and security. A single tear falls as Nina realizes that no matter her memories, these people are truly her family. In a flower-filled embrace, the 3 siblings reunite, finding strength in each other despite the tragedy they faced. Within the darkness of her mind, Nina fights through the chaotic memories and finally finds her path to clarity. She accepts her dual identity, smiling as the 2 worlds finally merge into a single, cohesive self. Years later, her brother arrives with news that her math skills have impressed even the local fruit shop owner. As her sister braids her hair, Nina realizes her past life memories have become a secret advantage in this world. She beams with pride, knowing her intelligence is a gift that will help her support her beloved family. With practiced hands, her sister ties a vibrant red ribbon into her long, golden brown hair. Her siblings admired the result, agreeing that the bold red color perfectly complements Nina's bright and determined spirit. Surrounded by flowers and affection, Nina feels truly happy, believing her life has finally found its peaceful rhythm. The peace is incinerated when Balox, a monstrous winged lion of fire, descends to destroy the village. Screams of terror erupt as fire consumes the buildings, and frantic villagers yell for everyone to flee for their lives. Nina stands paralyzed in the center of the carnage as her world burns to ashes around her once more. Through the smoke, voices cry out for the missing children, but Nina can only stare in mute horror. She spots a bloodied hand beneath the burning debris, her voice a fragile whisper as she calls for her brother. Reaching out toward the ruins, a desperate "no" sounding echoes the agonizing loss of everything she held dear. The scene fades into a visceral red haze of pain, marking the end of her childhood happiness. Now an orphan, Nina sits huddled on a transport boat, having been sold to human traffickers in the aftermath. Her face is a mask of exhaustion and despair as she drifts toward an uncertain and cruel future. She closes her eyes, perhaps seeking solace in the memories of those who loved her before the fire. A sharp sounding startles her as a new reality or memory suddenly pierces her consciousness. Reflecting on her journey, Nina feels a small sense of relief as her heart begins to heal slightly. She clutches a remnant of her past, whispering a tearful message to the family she misses so dearly. The sun shines brightly over a grand, many-towered manor, signaling a significant shift in Nina's surroundings. Inside the kitchen, a woman with ash blonde hair and glasses summons Nina to follow for her new duties. Inside the Louvoin kitchen, the ash blonde maid explains the family hierarchy to a listening Nina. Testing Nina's skills, the maid instructs her to learn the mansion layout between her kitchen duties. Mention of the Duke's illegitimate son, Adrian, sends a shock of recognition through the young girl. Nina realizes Adrian is the sub-male lead from a novel she read in her previous life. Memories of the novel's plot flood back, involving heroes uniting against a world-destroying villain. She recalls the epic conclusion where the leads joined forces to save the world from darkness. Stunned by the realization, Nina covers her mouth, hardly believing she's living within the story. The ash blonde maid snaps Nina back to reality, prompting an enthusiastic and slightly panicked response. A stern warning follows. The Duchess despises Adrian, and Nina must avoid her bad side. Calculating the timeline, Nina realizes she has arrived years before the novel's tragic events begin. Excitement glows in her eyes as she realizes she can use her future knowledge to help him. Determination hardens her gaze. She will not let Adrian suffer the same lonely fate. Standing tall with a clenched fist, the small maid prepares to change the course of history. A dark, spectral crow lands in a pale hand with a soft, feathery, fluttering sounding. Adrian stares coldly at the bird, dismissing others with the detached apathy of a weary soul. Nina works tirelessly at the sink, the rhythm of a steady clinking sounding accompanying her chores. Barking orders, an older maid sends Nina scrambling for more eggs while she prepares a meal. Balancing her tasks, Nina sprints through the kitchen, promising that the potatoes will be ready shortly. The ash blonde maid warns her to double-check everything, fearing the Duchess's unpredictable and volatile temper. Lugging a heavy basket, Nina's efforts are met with a demanding call for more speed. A lavish spread of gourmet food sits ready, a stark contrast to the grueling kitchen work. Exhaustion finally hits as Nina collapses onto a chair with a heavy, tired thump sounding. Grateful for her hard work, the older maid grants Nina a brief, much-needed break from the heat. Nina smiles faintly, feeling a sense of pride in how quickly she is adapting to her new life. Despite their rough exterior, Nina realizes the kitchen staff are truly kind people at heart. Peering through a window, Nina reflects on her journey, knowing her true mission has only just begun. The staff freezes in shock as a sudden, chilling presence enters the warm kitchen. The Duchess appears, her sharp gaze and elegant dress commanding immediate, fearful attention from everyone present. As the Duchess strides forward, the head maid nervously questions her unexpected visit before mealtime. Coldly holding a dish, the Duchess issues a cruel command to cease all food service for Adrian. The head maid gasps in horror, her hand flying to her mouth at the heartless order. A dark, malevolent aura surrounds the Duchess as she spits out Adrian's name with pure venom. Trembling, the maid bows deeply and retracts her question, silenced by the Duchess's icy authority. With a malicious smile, the Duchess pours out the soup, the liquid hitting the floor with the splash sounding. The fine ceramic bowl shatters against the stone with a sharp, violent crash sounding. The kitchen staff remains bowed in terrified silence as the Duchess leaves the mess behind. Once the Duchess is gone, the staff begins to clean up the wreckage in somber silence. Stress lines Nina's senior's face as she clutches her head, while Nina watches with growing concern. Memories of the Duke's indifference toward his own family surface, painting a picture of cold abandonment. Despite the Duchess's protests, the Duke remained unmoved, his silence a wall between him and his household. The maids whisper about the distance between father and son, noting they rarely even speak. Listening to the gossip, Nina feels a pang of sympathy for the boy trapped in this cold home. Her heart aches as she remembers that despite his future power, Adrian is still just a child. Facing the staff, Nina's resolve deepens. She cannot stand by and watch a child starve. The maids panic, warning Nina that the Duchess will show no mercy if she is caught. Determination fuels her voice as Nina declares her intent to act. Consequences be damned. Twilight falls over the silent, grand manor as Nina prepares to make her secret move. Navigating the dark, spooky hallways, Nina clutches a hidden tray of food for the starving boy. Her heart beats fast with anticipation as she nears Adrian's door, hoping to reach him safely. Reflections on the Duke's hidden rage reveal why the novel's lead, Fiona, could never trust him. Nina carries a tray through the quiet manor, reflecting on the Duchess's cruelty and Adrian's traumatizing childhood. Peering through the heavy door, a soft creak sounding marks Nina's cautious entry into the young master's study. Nina beams with a bright, hopeful smile as she prepares to serve Adrian a meal with genuine care. Adrian sits silently at a large desk, his eyes fixed on a book as soft sunlight fills the room. The black-haired boy ignores Nina's presence entirely, a gentle flip sounding as he turns a page of his book. Stunned by his cold indifference, Nina stands paralyzed as she realizes she is being completely and utterly ignored. Nina enthusiastically presents the beef stew, a spark sounding as she boasts about peeling the potatoes herself for him. Despite her cheerful efforts, Adrian remains engrossed in his reading, his silence a wall between them. Frustration bubbles up inside Nina, a soft chomp sounding as she bites back her irritation at his persistent apathy. Refusing to give up, Nina leans in closer and calls out to Adrian with a persistent, friendly energy. Adrian turns his back to her, focused on his studies, while Nina watches him with a mixture of pity. A chilling whoosh sounding accompanies Adrian's cold gaze as he shuts out the world, his heart seemingly frozen. Back in the kitchen, Nina pounds dough with manic intensity while her senior coworker watches with a worried expression. Flames of determination surround Nina as she slams the dough, a thud sounding that startles the entire kitchen staff. Wiping away sweat, Nina sighs with a heavy huff sounding, frustrated that her future knowledge isn't working as planned. She recalls the novel's dark details of Adrian's abuse and the bruises that marked his lonely, painful childhood. The tragic history continues, showing Adrian surviving poisoning attempts before eventually killing his own family to become Duke. A blood-stained sword rests against heavy chains, illustrating Adrian's future life spent hunting monsters in a desolate land. Nina continues kneading, remembering that only the original female lead's arrival brought any true prosperity to the territory. An open book depicts the future wealth and success that the novel's leads were destined to achieve together. Nina rages at the unfairness, a screeching sounding as she pulls the dough, vowing to change Adrian's miserable fate. A firm resolve hardens her gaze, a hum sounding as Nina decides she will rewrite the boy's tragic story. Against a backdrop of yellow flowers, she declares her absolute refusal to let the depressing narrative repeat itself. A leather-bound book surrounded by petals represents the story she is determined to alter with her own hands. Nina channels her anger into her work, a thud sounding as she prepares for her next attempt at kindness. The ash-blonde maid interrupts Nina's frantic baking, a soft swish sounding as she calls for the girl's attention. Nina gasps in shock, staring at the massive mountain of dough she created while lost in her own thoughts. Apologizing profusely, the tiny maid watches as her coworkers laugh at the absurdly large amount of bread they've made. A sudden spark of inspiration hits her, a ding sounding as Nina's eyes light up with a new idea. She imagines a world of sweets and treats, hoping that sugar might be the key to opening Adrian's heart. Nina envisions a peaceful picnic where she and Adrian share a meal and a rare, genuine moment of happiness. A soft knock-knock sounding startles Adrian from his weary thoughts as he sits alone in his dimly lit room. Adrian looks up with a flicker of surprise, his cold expression softening just slightly at the unexpected visitor. Nina presents a tray of gourmet food, enthusiastically suggesting a picnic in the garden to the young master. The boy looks down at his book in silence, his detached demeanor hiding the conflict within his young heart. A sparkling spread of baguette sandwiches and fresh salad is presented, a tempting contrast to his usual lonely meals. Nina clenches her fists with fiery spirit, a roar sounding as she vows to never stop trying for him. She follows Adrian through the manor, persistently offering him nourishment, while he remains a distant, silent shadow. Even as he walks away, Nina runs beside him with a basket, refusing to let him retreat into isolation. She pours him a fresh cup of tea, a splash sounding as she continues her unwavering mission of care. 6 months pass as the manor is bathed in the golden hues of autumn, marking a long half-year. Nina kneels on the floor, her heart heavy as she presents a tray to the master who remains distant. A weary huff sounding escapes her as Nina realizes that despite her efforts, they feel further apart than ever. She presents a bowl of pumpkin soup with a forced cheerfulness, but Adrian's back is still turned to her. A heavy bang sounding echoes as the door closes, leaving Nina alone and dejected in the cold, silent hallway. Inside his room, Adrian leans against the wall, a soft pat sounding as he lingers in the oppressive quiet. Adrian stares into the distance with a look of profound loneliness, his red eyes reflecting a deep, unspoken sorrow. Back in the warm kitchen, Nina sulks over her tea while her coworkers chat happily about their day. She confesses her feelings of rejection to the ash-blonde maid, struggling to understand why her sincerity isn't enough. The maid listens thoughtfully, a soft hum sounding as she considers Nina's struggle to reach the boy's heart. Nina gazes up at Adrian's high emotional walls, wondering if he can even hear her calling from below. The kitchen staff encourages Nina to stay patient, promising that her sincerity will eventually reach the boy's heart. A kind coworker winks and hands Nina a special pouch of treats to help her mission of kindness. Nina sprints toward the gardens, clutching the precious cookies and a covered tray with a hopeful, excited energy. Golden, buttery cookies shimmer inside the pouch, a small but significant gesture of care for the young master. Reflecting on the staff's generosity, Nina realizes how much they sacrificed to help her reach out to Adrian. She moves with a selfless heart, determined to support the boy without needing any acknowledgement or reward. Peering from behind a stone wall, she watches the looming instructor and the small, vulnerable boy from afar. Horror strikes Nina's face as she witnesses a sudden, cruel act of violence against the defenseless young master. A sharp whack sounding echoes as the drunk instructor brutally slaps Adrian, knocking the small boy to the dirt. Looming over the boy, the instructor rages about his training methods while reeking of alcohol and malice. Adrian falls back into the dirt, battered and bleeding as the man mocks his parents' cold abandonment. Lying in the dust, Adrian's red eyes remain cold and empty, his spirit dulled by the repetitive abuse. Dark thoughts consume Adrian as he considers killing the man, knowing it wouldn't change his miserable existence. He realizes that removing one trash instructor would only lead to another taking his place in this cruel cycle. Adrian retreats into a dark mental void, curled up in isolation as his hope slowly drains away. He thinks of Nina as a strange impurity, a persistent presence that refuses to leave him alone. Memories of Nina's cheerful face and her constant offerings of food flicker through the boy's dark consciousness. Despite his attempts to push her away with icy rejection, her unwavering kindness still haunts his lonely thoughts. Nina's bright, genuine smile illuminates his mind, a stark contrast to the darkness and pain surrounding him. Adrian wonders why the persistent maid suddenly came to mind while he lies broken in the dirt. He assumes she must finally be tired of him as a blurred figure rushes toward the training grounds. Nina leaps forward with a fierce cry, slamming her silver tray onto the instructor's head with a loud whack sounding. The instructor screams in pain as Nina descends upon him like a wild animal, fueled by righteous anger. Nina bites and claws at the drunkard, screaming at him for his heartless treatment of a helpless child. From the ground, Adrian watches in stunned silence as the small maid recklessly defends him against the larger man. The instructor grabs Nina's face in a rage, but she screams her name, refusing to back down from him. Adrian remains on the ground, his fine clothes stained with dirt and blood from the instructor's brutal beating. The burly man seizes Nina's arm, calling her a little rat as he prepares to retaliate against her. Adrian suddenly pulls Nina toward him, his voice urgent as he asks if she's all right while the instructor yells. The instructor clutches his head while Adrian holds Nina close, shielding her with his small but steady frame. Drawing his sword, the instructor vows to teach the lowly maid a lethal lesson for her daring interference. A malevolent purple aura surges forward, answering a dark call to devour the enemy standing before them. Adrian's eyes glow with a chilling red light as glowing chains erupt from his hand, ensnaring the man. The instructor screams in absolute terror as the magical chains drag him down into a dark, bottomless abyss. Nina's heart races with a fast thump-thump sounding as she sits in Adrian's arms, witnessing his terrifying hidden power. She realizes with a start that Adrian has already formed a contract with a powerful spirit of darkness. Nina reflects on the desperation required to summon such a presence, realizing the depth of Adrian's lonely suffering. Adrian pulls Nina into a protective, desperate embrace, his voice trembling as he checks her for injuries. Nina's face turns beet red in embarrassment as she realizes her precious cookies have been completely crushed. Overwhelmed by the situation, Nina buries her face in her hands, lamenting the disaster she failed to prevent. Nina tearfully presents the ruined cookie crumbs to Adrian, apologizing profusely for the failure of her gift. The black-haired boy stares at her with wide, bewildered eyes, clearly moved by her strange and persistent care. Adrian suddenly pulls Nina into a tight, clinging hug, finally seeking warmth after years of cold isolation. They sit together on a garden bench as Adrian calmly explains that no one will miss the drunken instructor. Nina eats a cookie crumb with a happy munch sounding, while Adrian watches her with a soft, curious look. Adrian looks down with a somber expression, apologizing because Nina almost got hurt for his sake. He tells her not to step in next time, but Nina ignores him with a focused munch sounding. Nina gently points out that Adrian was the one who truly saved her, making the boy flinch with a start sounding. Adrian acknowledges Nina's bravery while she sits beside him munching on the last of the cookie crumbs. Nina suddenly spots something in the night sky, a gasp sounding as she points toward the trees. Pointing toward the heavens, Nina excitedly tells Adrian to look at the beautiful shooting star passing by. Adrian admits he missed it, so Nina instructs him to make 3 wishes next time they see one. Nina clasps her hands together, fervently wishing for plenty of cake at the upcoming New Year's party. A rare, soft laugh sounding escapes Adrian as he watches the girl's pure-hearted obsession with sweets. Nina pouts, insisting that cake is important business, while Adrian smiles and agrees that he understands. Worried about his lack of dinner, Nina promises to bring better food tomorrow before they head back. Nina offers a formal bow, a soft rustle sounding as she prepares to return to her quarters. She bids the young master goodnight, but a sudden pause sounding catches her as she lingers briefly. The bespectacled maid offers Nina a pouch of treats, encouraging her persistent mission to reach the boy. Memories of the instructor's cruel grip flash through Nina's mind, her face twisted in a defiant scream. Adrian looks up in surprise as Nina calls his name, her voice breaking through his lonely silence. Determination fills Nina's gaze as she reaches out, her hand extended to offer the support he needs. Their hands clasp together in a silent pact, a firm squeeze sounding as a new bond is forged. Adrian holds Nina's hand tightly, seeking the warmth and comfort he's been denied for so many years. Nina stares at their joined hands with wide eyes, her heart swelling with an unexpected, deep emotion. They share a peaceful picnic among the daisies, a splash sounding as Nina pours tea for them. A butterfly lands on the basket of fresh bread, symbolizing the newfound tranquility within the garden grounds. Nina watches Adrian with a soft, affectionate smile, grateful to see him finally looking at ease. Adrian gazes at a yellow butterfly on his finger, a rare, peaceful expression gracing his young face. Nina's heart warms as she observes the boy's quiet joy, satisfied that her efforts are finally working. Nina prances forward with a plate of strawberry cake, a happy hum sounding as she brings the treat. During the celebration, Adrian plays the violin beautifully, while Nina rejoices that her cake wishes came true. Nina takes a blissful bite, a happy munch sounding as she savors the perfect taste of the dessert. She raves about the butter and sugar, while Adrian sits beside her, enjoying a rare moment of luxury. Nina suddenly mentions rumors regarding the 7 Calamities Night Order, her expression turning serious and thoughtful. The dark forest looms in her mind, representing the dangerous path and high mortality rate of the knights. Nina suggests the Duchess should cut costs to help Adrian, her voice hushed as they sit together. Adrian looks at Nina with genuine warmth, softly thanking her for being so consistently kind to him. Nina's face breaks into a wide, joyful grin, her heart fluttering at the boy's unexpected words of gratitude. Dismissing his thanks, Nina playfully nudges him, insisting that they are simply friends after all. Adrian chuckles softly as he wipes cream from his lip, his eyes crinkling with a newfound, genuine happiness. Nina's face turns beet red, a sudden flustered huff sounding as she reacts to his playful admission. Making a hasty excuse about party chores, Nina leaps up to leave, her cheeks still burning with embarrassment. Nina waves a cheerful farewell, wishing the young master a new year filled with great blessings. Entering the chilly hallway, Nina shivers, a soft chatter sounding as she regrets not bringing a warm blanket. A sudden, sharp thud sounding occurs as Nina accidentally bumps into a looming, regal figure in the corridor. Nina bows frantically, stammering an apology while the Duchess looks down at her with chilling, cold eyes. The Duchess sneers with a terrifying, demonic aura, comparing Nina to a filthy rat invading her grand home. Brutal punishment follows as Nina is doused in freezing water, shivering violently as her clothes soak through. Cruel maids mock Nina from the shadows, claiming she deserved this fate for being too bold. Nina collapses onto the cold ground, her vision fading as her body finally succumbs to the icy exhaustion. Adrian carries the shivering Nina to safety, his face a mask of worry, while other maids rush to help. Adrian stands alone in the quiet hall, looking down at a discarded red hair ribbon with profound sadness. He lingers outside the room where Nina recovers, clutching the ribbon as he watches over her from afar. Narrative text reveals that Nina spent 4 agonizing days near death before finally opening her eyes. The Duchess turns her back on the matter, dismissing Nina as a dead nuisance no longer worth notice. Night settles over the sprawling manor, leaving the hallway in a heavy, oppressive silence. Lying in bed, Nina frets over the fact that Adrian has been avoiding her for an entire week. Nina lies in bed, determined to stop Adrian from avoiding her and refusing to give up on him. A startled gasp sounding escapes Nina as Adrian suddenly speaks, revealing he knows she is lurking nearby. Adrian turns his back, coldly declaring that he no longer wishes to speak with the persistent maid. As Adrian walks away, he pauses with a soft step, sounding surprised when Nina fails to respond to him. Nina suddenly lunges forward, a firm grab sounding as she seizes Adrian's arm to prevent his retreat. In a desperate move, Nina pins Adrian to the bed, stunning the young master with her sudden physical boldness. Adrian stares up at her with wide eyes, realizing Nina has seen through his attempts to push her away. Tears well in Nina's eyes as she warns Adrian that his self-sacrificing distance will only lead to disaster. Nina looks down with fierce devotion, firmly stating her desire to remain by his side despite the dangers. She holds him close, asking if this closeness is acceptable, while Adrian remains speechless beneath her steady gaze. Nina beams with joy, embracing Adrian tightly as she successfully breaks through his icy, protective emotional walls. Over the next 2 years, the pair shares secret nightly meetings as the manor's strict surveillance finally grows lax. Adrian gazes at Nina with a soft, affectionate look, though a hint of lingering unease remains in his eyes. On Adrian's 15th birthday, the Duke officially appoints him as the commander of the prestigious Black Knight Order. Nina slams her fist onto the table with a loud bang sounding, outraged by the dangerous, suicidal appointment. She confronts Adrian, arguing that sending him to such a perilous place is essentially a lethal death sentence. Nina weeps, terrified because the tragic events of the original story are unfolding far earlier than she ever expected. A jewelry box opens to reveal gold coins and a precious pendant, prepared for their looming, painful separation. Adrian asks Nina to leave the ducal house for her own safety, offering her the funds to escape. Images of their past flicker as Nina realizes Adrian has been quietly preparing for their inevitable final farewell. Adrian looks at her with deep sincerity, confessing that his only concern in this world is Nina's well-being. Nina sits alone at the desk, staring at the jewelry box as she processes Adrian's request for her departure. With a defiant gaze, Nina rejects the idea of running away alone, her resolve hardening for the path ahead. Nina prepares to leave the Grand Ducal estate on her own terms, following the path Adrian was sent upon. Nina tearfully hugs her fellow maids, who pooled their meager savings together to support her secret travel expenses. Determined to reunite with Adrian, Nina arrives at the recruitment center to join the dangerous Black Knight Order. A shimmer sounding occurs as Nina reveals a glowing spirit mark on her wrist to the astonished elderly recruiter. The recruiter screams in disbelief, announcing that the small girl has miraculously passed the rigorous entrance testing process. A carriage rattles along a dirt path with a clatter sounding, carrying Nina toward the mysterious violet forest. Nina gazes out at the dense woods, realizing she has finally reached the outskirts of the dangerous, dark territory. The other recruits mock Nina's small stature, laughing at the idea of a child believing in spirit legends. An illustrated map shows the corrupted purple aura of the shattered spirit lord seeping into the surrounding mountain land. While the men continue their mockery, Nina silently reflects on the hidden, terrifying truths she knows from the novel. A dark flashback depicts a spirit lord rebelling against the great spirits, plunging the entire world into chaos. The rebellion was crushed, and the shattered spirit lord's remains transformed into monstrous, corrupted creatures known as Bellocks. Nina observes her surroundings, knowing the Black Knight Order's true purpose is to contain the spreading Belloc threat. The new recruits assemble in the courtyard as one of them suggests making a bet about their survival. Two knights mock Nina's age, comparing her to their young captain. Apparently, the recruitment bar has hit rock bottom. Nina suddenly leaps into the air with a happy hop sounding, surprising the arrogant knights standing beside her. Adrian freezes in shock as Nina waves frantically, loudly announcing her arrival to the entire gathered knight order. Adrian's eyes widened in absolute disbelief, his composure shattering at the sight of his former maid in uniform. A loud crash sounding occurs as the scene transitions, leaving everyone stunned by Nina's reckless and joyful appearance. Nina offers a sheepish laugh, while Adrian stands tall in his commander's cloak, unable to process the reunion. Adrian sighs in deep exasperation as Nina cheerfully explains that she officially applied as a new knight recruit. Rubbing his temples, Adrian reminds her of the danger, pointing out that she lacks any formal sword training. Nina confidently reveals the spirit mark on her wrist, proving she possesses the magical power required to be there. Adrian questions the origin of her power, leading Nina to reveal the tragic death of her siblings by Bellocks. A painful memory flashes of a young, crying Nina surrounded by glowing chains during a brutal monster attack. Nina smiles through the lingering trauma, explaining that she finally found the joy needed to manifest her power. Facing each other once more, Adrian and Nina prepare to face the darkness of the Violet Forest together. Adrian warns Nina that she might regret her bold words, but she defiantly refuses to back down. Adrian shares a rare, warm laugh, admitting he can never truly win against Nina's persistent and caring nature. Nina joyfully throws her arms around Adrian, their bond deepening amidst a background of soft, glowing flower petals. The scene shifts to the imposing stone fortress that serves as the grand headquarters for the Black Knight Order. Inside the strategic war room, Adrian and a fellow knight study a detailed map to plan their next move. Nina embraces her new life by diligently mopping the hallway floors, her expression determined despite the menial labor. While carrying a heavy pot of stew, Nina aggressively yells at any recruits attempting to skip their scheduled mealtime. Red-haired Louis and another knight watch with amused expressions as the tiny girl takes charge of the barracks. The recruits gather around as Nina stands firm with her soup pot, proving she is a force of nature. Adrian, Nina, and several senior knights share a casual dinner, drinking from wooden mugs around a simple table. A senior knight curiously questions the exact nature of the relationship between Adrian and his former housemaid. Adrian and Nina exchange a silent, awkward look, while the rest of the table waits for their revealing answer. Nina playfully leans on Adrian, laughing off the knight's curiosity by claiming that his suspicion is a total lie. A sudden, panicked shout about a bear case interrupts Jean's peaceful drink, causing a humorous, chaotic commotion. Red-haired Louis playfully ruffles Nina's hair while the group celebrates their newfound family bond within the Knight Order. The light-hearted mood shatters as Jean reads a grim letter announcing the sudden death of young Master Gerald. Nina realizes with horror that the novel's tragic poisoning incident is about to happen, and she must act fast. Under a heavy downpour, several dark carriages move solemnly toward the site of the Master's rain-soaked funeral. Nina watches from a distance as Adrian sits across from a veiled woman in black during a tense meeting. Nina imagines herself heroically pushing away a poisoned teacup and dramatically revealing the murder plot to save Adrian. Reality proves far crueler as Nina drinks the poison herself, blood dripping from her lips as she collapses. A teacup shatters against the floor while Nina falls unconscious, her vision fading into a cold, drowsy darkness. Trapped in a dark, glowing abyss, Nina feels herself drifting while a desperate voice calls out her name. A distraught Adrian screams Nina's name through the storm, his face a mask of absolute agony and raw fear. Adrian carries Nina's limp, cloaked body through the mud, pleading with her not to leave him alone in this world. Adrian notices Nina's breathing has become dangerously faint, fueling his frantic desperation to find her immediate medical help. Looking into the dense forest, Adrian realizes he must plunge into the darkness he has always feared for her. Adrian steels his resolve to enter the Forbidden Woods, a dangerous path he has never dared to take before. Racing against time, Adrian makes a silent, desperate plea for the darkness to lead him to a safe place. In a surreal sequence, Adrian carries Nina through a forest of crows, following glowing footprints toward a hidden sanctuary. A sudden, sharp footstep sounding occurs as Louise spots the drenched Adrian emerging from the woods with the girl. Louise reacts in shock as a gasping, shivering Adrian arrives at the outpost while still clutching Nina tightly. With tears streaming down his face, Adrian hoarsely whispers Nina's name, his heart breaking over her unresponsive state. Inside the infirmary, Adrian and the senior knights watch over Nina as she lies unconscious on a simple bed. Cyril, the long-haired physician of the Black Knights, steps forward with a serious expression to examine the girl. Adrian explains that Nina vomited blood and has an icy body temperature, begging the doctor to save her life. Jean and Louis try to comfort their distraught captain, reminding him of Nina's legendary stubbornness and survival instincts. Cyril carefully examines Nina's arm, his brow furrowed as he assesses the spread of the lethal, fast-acting poison. A small huff sounding escapes Cyril as he realizes Nina lowered her own temperature to slow the poison's circulation. Cyril orders a knight to fetch herbs from his greenhouse, confident that Nina has the strength to endure treatment. Nina remains trapped in a quiet, dark mental space, almost tempted to surrender to the peace of eternal sleep. A sudden, violent jolt sounding occurs as Nina's soul is forcibly pulled back toward the waking world by medicine. Nina screams in agony as Adrian and Cyril hold her down during the excruciatingly painful detoxification recovery process. Cyril warns that she must overcome the sensation of knives piercing her body to survive the lethal poison's effects. Adrian grips Nina's hand tightly as she thrashes in pain, his own face reflecting her intense and prolonged suffering. Adrian looks down with a shadowed, somber expression, his heart heavy with the weight of Nina's sacrifice for him. A firm, desperate grab sounding occurs as Adrian clenches his fist around Nina's wrist, refusing to let her go. A soft, sleepy groan sounding escapes Nina as she finally wakes up, rubbing her eyes in the morning light. Nina lets out a sudden, startled scream sounding as her memories return, her cartoonish silhouette vibrating with pure shock. Nina complains about her aching, battered body while Cyril scolds her for causing such a loud morning commotion. Cyril explains his temporary stay near the Violet Forest to focus entirely on Nina's delicate and specialized treatment. A silent observer remarks on the captain's uncharacteristically devastated expression, reflecting the deep trauma of the recent events. Cyril playfully scolds Nina for worrying everyone, while she pouts and protests his rough treatment of a patient. Nina examines her mouth as Cyril explains the severe internal damage caused by the lethal poison she ingested. Inside the sunlit infirmary, Cyril hands Nina a dose of medicine, demanding she prioritize her long recovery process. Nina stares at the vial, murmuring that 6 months is far too long to wait for her strength. Displaying her signature spirit, Nina gives a cheerful peace sign, looking much healthier than she did just days ago. The sun shines over the stone battlements of the Black Knight Order's fortress as life returns to normal. Nina stands proudly in her full knight's uniform, surrounded by floating sparkles and blooming flowers, in a triumphant return. Just 2 months later, Louis and his companions stare in disbelief at Nina's miraculously fast and complete recovery. Nina boastfully recalls Cyril's begrudging praise of her survival instincts, while a chibi Cyril grumbles in the background. Adrien discusses logistics with Jean, his captain's cloak billowing as they move through the busy fortress courtyard. Under a full moon, a weary Nina collapses onto her bed with a sudden, soft thud sounding after celebrating. Lying alone in the quiet dark, Nina's thoughts drift toward Adrien, wondering if he is truly doing all right. A haunting vision of Adrian's cold, glowing eyes appears as he questions why he should feel any anger. Adrian's stoic face remains masked in shadow, his piercing pink eyes revealing a hidden depth of repressed emotion. A sudden, heavy footstep sounding occurs as Adrien enters her room, questioning if her sacrifice was meant for praise. Nina feels a chill as she realizes Adrien isn't celebrating. His calm demeanor hides a terrifying, simmering fury. Adrien leans over her bed with a desperate intensity, pleading with her to never speak of her sacrifice again. Up close, Adrien's composure completely breaks, his eyes wide with the raw fear of losing the person he loves. The light catches the intricate blue jewel on Adrien's cravat as he struggles to articulate his overwhelming grief. Memories of a lonely, younger Adrien surface, recalling the many times he had to watch loved ones suffer helplessly. A dark flashback depicts a young child lying motionless, a grim reminder of the losses Adrien has already endured. Under the pouring rain, Adrien carries Nina's small, limp body, reliving the terror of nearly letting her go. Tears well in Adrien's eyes as he admits his greatest fear was that Nina would leave his side forever. Overcome with emotion, Adrien sinks to his knees and pulls Nina into a fierce, trembling embrace on her bed. Adrien buries his face in her shoulder, whispering that he blames himself for ever letting her join the order. Nina returns the hug with warmth, her affection causing a sudden burst of soft, pink flower petals to bloom. While holding him, Nina softly says his name, her expression gentle as she comforts the man who saved her. A circular vision depicts Nina's internal reflection. She confesses that she knew about the poison from the very start. Adrien demands to know why she would knowingly consume something so lethal, his hands gripping her shoulders in shock. Nina points a finger at him, explaining with simple logic that she drank it because he was going to. A memory flashes of Nina intercepting Adrien's attempt to check the tea, a calculated move to protect him. Nina's gaze hardens as she vows to intercept any poison or blade meant for him from this day forward. Adrien looks down at his empty cup as Nina explains that her sacrifice helped distract the Duchess's prying eyes. Nina thinks to herself that her master is far from innocent, acknowledging his hidden, darker side with understanding. Adrien looks at her with a mix of wonder and concern, asking what her own motivations truly are. Nina smiles brightly, declaring that her actions represent the very best a member of the Black Knights can offer. The two share a tender, smiling moment, their bond forged in the fires of sacrifice and mutual protection. A sudden, sharp clang sounding occurs as Nina stands exhausted, her face a pale mask of fatigue while training. Louis notices Nina's terrible condition and kindly suggests she take the day off from her rigorous patrol duties. Back in bed, Nina lets out a happy sigh, sounding relieved that the novel's third major incident passed safely. A bloody omen appears, announcing the upcoming fourth incident, the total annihilation of the Black Knight Order. Nina rolls around her bed in a cartoonish panic, screaming in disbelief at the terrifying future she must prevent. Staring at the ceiling, Nina reflects on how cruel the original story's path is for the sub-male lead. Nina wakes up sweating after a series of nightmares involving monstrous, fortress-destroying Bellacs and crayons. While walking through the woods, Nina asks a confused Louis what could possibly lead to their order's destruction. Louis sighs, explaining that the lack of funding for high-quality gear is a far bigger threat than monsters. A soft, repeated tap sounding occurs as Louis points at his sword, lamenting that cheap steel won't pierce Bellocks. A horrifying vision shows giant, purple aura Bellocks looming over the knights, threatening to wipe them out completely. Louis questions why Nina is so agitated after her own explanation of the situation's realism. Louis dismisses the risk of monster attacks and notes that worrying about money is a waste of time. Nina's expression shifts to one of sudden, bright inspiration when Louis jokingly mentions finding a steel mine. Nina remembers the original heroine, Fiona, discovered a hidden mine while exploring the dangerous Violet Forest. She recalls the bright steel was of such high quality, it surpassed even the famous Lindsay steel. Nina realizes that since Fiona only found it by accident after being kidnapped, its location remains unknown. Imagining her own grave, Nina acknowledges that searching the woods alone would be a suicide mission. As they walk, Nina asks Louis if there are any alternative sources of funding for the order. Nina envisions Cyril and the other knights, considering how the doctor's expertise might lead to profit. A sudden, sharp slip occurs as Nina nearly falls into a puddle, only to be caught by Louis. They observe oil leaking from a tree snapped by a monster, sparking a new idea in Nina's mind. Nina beams with joy as she identifies the oil tree, a source of premium lamp fuel. Louis is impressed by her obscure knowledge, while Nina nervously hopes her novel secret remains safe. An informational window reveals that Fiona originally built her massive wealth by selling oil tree lamps. A golden, glowing vision confirms the incredible financial success Fiona achieved with the tree's unique sap. Nina grabs Louis in a burst of wild energy, having finally identified their financial lifeline. Visualizing a flood of gold coins, Nina celebrates their certain future of luxury and well-funded nightly duties. Nina visits the gray-haired physician, Cyril, who listens to her proposal while smoking his wooden pipe. She enthusiastically suggests growing the forest's rare plants to sell them as premium goods at the market. Cyril begins investigating his herb collection, intrigued by the potential commercial demand Nina has described. Cyril asks if she is a doctor. Nina nervously laughs, claiming her knowledge comes from business interest. Cyril warns that the order is nearly bankrupt and their supply lines are in danger of being cut. He reveals the Imperial Guard's constant losses in battle have left the order in a state of financial ruin. Nina realizes the territory's traditional farming is failing and they desperately need her new agricultural plan. Nina wonders why a physician of Cyril's caliber would choose to remain in such a struggling outpost. Cyril's eyes glow with a dark, unsettling intensity as he reveals his freedom to perform human dissections. Nina hurriedly packs jars for the doctor, choosing to ignore his disturbing medical motivations for staying. Louis watches with total confusion as Nina frantically digs up rare plants in the middle of the woods. Nina triumphantly unearths a bunch of transparency fruit, a rare treasure she stole from the original story. Nina explains to a confused Louis that these fruits will be their future best-selling commercial product. A shadowed figure of Fiona represents the original path Nina is actively diverting to save Adrian. Nina joyfully plants her new seedlings in a garden plot she successfully begged Louis to let her use. While gardening, Nina wonders when the time will come for Adrian to officially claim his dukedom. A bloody vision shows Adrian standing before his palace, his sword drawn for a tragic family revenge. Nina reflects on the original story's cruel ending where Adrian is forced to kill his own relatives. Nina vows to prevent Adrian from becoming a blood-stained monster by handling the difficult tasks herself. Sitting in her garden, Nina contemplates if a coup or rebellion is necessary to secure Adrian's peaceful future. Nina is startled by a voice asking if she plans to do all the planting in one day. Adrian appears with a warm smile, his pink eyes reflecting his amusement at Nina's dedicated gardening. Adrian kneels beside Nina, examining the small sprouts that represent her grand plan for the territory. A soft, quick gasp escapes Nina as Adrian rolls up his sleeves to help her with the gardening. Together, they spend the afternoon carefully placing the seedlings into the dark, rich soil of the garden. As the sun sets, Nina and Adrian look out over their hard work with a sense of pride. Nina declares her intention to use the garden to revive the territory once Adrian becomes the Duke. Adrian pauses, looking at her with a somber, intense expression as he questions if she truly wants that. Nina smiles brightly at him, her face full of hope as she confirms her belief in his future. Adrian stares at her, his expression softened by her unconditional support and her cheerful, unwavering spirit. Adrian laughs gently, remarking on Nina's tendency to always aim for the most difficult and challenging goals. They stand together in the twilight, their shared shadows cast across the promising sprouts of their new garden. Nina boastfully reassures Adrian that she has a plan for everything, even if he doesn't become the Duke. Nina excitedly plans to build wealth and eat cake daily, while Adrian quietly agrees with her ambitious vision. The pair sits together at sunset, overlooking the sprawling castle town and the promising future they intend to build. Nina passionately argues that healthy competition is the only way to ensure their people never fall behind during a crisis. Adrian smiles warmly at her, asserting that his true responsibility is to set goals that look far beyond mere survival. Inspired by his leadership, Nina decides to provide elite knights with long coats, certain that Adrian will look magnificent. Nina playfully promises to handle the gardening while Adrian focuses on growing the Black Knight Order into a legendary force. Following their heartfelt conversation, the rigorous exams to select the territory's elite knights officially begin under a floral banner. A sudden, sharp clang sounding occurs as two knights spar fiercely with a sword and halberd in the training yard. The ceremony concludes with the promotion of less than 10 knights, with Jean and Nina officially joining the elite ranks. Louis enthusiastically presents Nina with her new uniform, causing her to let out a surprised gasp at the formal attire. The moment turns comedic as Nina's coat proves far too large, sending Louis into a fit of hysterical laughter. Louis reassures the huffing Nina that she is still growing, playfully patting her head while she vows to get even. Now 17, Nina showcases her success by harvesting a massive basket of vibrant, glowing red fruits from her garden. Nina beams with pride, her long pigtails catching the light as she reflects on her official status as an elite. A close-up reveals Nina's soft, hopeful expression as she realizes how much her life has changed over 2 years. Standing in the center of her thriving garden, Nina marvels at the lush results of her dedicated hard work. In a moment of joyful self-praise, Nina celebrates her perseverance while hearts flutter around her cheerful, chibi-style internal reflection. Eager to share her triumph, Nina picks up her basket and prepares to brag about her harvest to Adrian. Nina walks confidently through the garden, certain that her plan to enrich the Black Knights is finally reaching perfection. A sudden, dull tap sounding occurs as Nina's basket falls and spills her fruit, her world suddenly turning cold. Her smile vanishes instantly as she gazes ahead with wide, terrified eyes, the atmosphere shifting into one of pure dread. A massive, glowing pyramid artifact pulsates with dark purple energy, marking the beginning of the very disaster Nina feared. Nina stares at the terrifying magical construct in the woods, realizing with a sinking heart that her future is compromised. She scans the area for any other clues, but the woods remain eerily silent around the glowing, rune-covered artifact. The horrifying truth is revealed as a group of hooded cultists gather around a ritual circle, confirming the impending doom. A heavy thud sounding occurs as Nina collapses to her knees, screaming in disbelief at the cruel twist of fate. Her panicked cry echoes through the twilight, birds scattering as she realizes she is truly in a desperate situation. Nina hunches over her ruined harvest, identifying this moment as the catastrophic incident meant to wipe out her entire order. Despair turns to grim determination as Nina veils to stop the tragic original ending of the story at any cost. She briefly recalls the warmth of the nights drinking and laughing together, feeling her resolve to protect her found family. Shaking off her panic, Nina springs back up, deciding she must immediately report the cultist's presence to the others. Nina tries to maintain a positive mindset while hums a nervous tune, desperately walking away from the ritual site. A sudden, dizzying wave of disorientation hits Nina, her vision blurring as the world begins to spin around her. She struggles to stay upright, realizing too late that she has wandered directly into a hidden, magical trap. A sharp, wet crack sounding occurs as thorny magical vines lash out from the shadows and ensnare Nina's leg. Nina is pulled toward the earth, falling directly into the waiting maw of a massive, carnivorous pink flower. She identifies the monster as a plant-type bellac, realizing that every shake of its leaves spreads a lethal poison. Hanging upside down, Nina desperately holds her breath and draws her sword, preparing for a life-or-death struggle against the beast. A metallic ting sounding occurs as Nina grips her hilt and calls upon the north wind to aid her. She unleashes a powerful blast of swirling green wind, determined to blow the monstrous plant and its poison away. The wind strikes the center of the pink monster, which snaps its toothy mouth shut in a violent defensive reflex. Nina dives toward the flower's core, her blade glowing with a frigid blue light as she prepares a final strike. A sharp shink sounding occurs as Nina slashes through the air, her movement a blur of calculated, knightly precision. Nina spins gracefully through the air, her sword cutting through the thorny vines as she counterattacks the predatory bellac. A heavy thud sounding occurs as Nina drives her blade deep into the monster's throat, purple blood splattering everywhere. A series of loud thuds sounding occurs as the bellac's vines go limp and its massive body collapses in defeat. Nina clutches her leg and groans in pain, realizing her ankle was severely injured during the brutal encounter. She looks at her crushed herbs and ruined fruit with frustration, lamenting the loss of her hard-earned garden products. A soft rustle sounding occurs as Nina wipes her bruised face, her expression hardening with an unwavering, fierce resolve. Staggering forward and using her sword as a crutch, Nina pushes through the pain to warn her comrades of danger. Nina summons her wind magic, begging the north wind to carry her swiftly back toward the order space. Jean, standing guard at the fortress gate, is startled as a swirling green trail of magical energy approaches him. A sudden, quick gasp escapes Jean as he hears a familiar voice calling his name through the magical gale. Nina arrives looking bruised and exhausted, laughing nervously when the startled Jean demands to know what happened to her. A series of quick taps sounding occurs as Jean scolds Nina for her recklessness in entering the dangerous forest alone. Nina playfully dismisses Jean's lecture, promising to listen to his scolding only after she reports the immediate threat she found. She urgently warns Jean about the mysterious magic circle she discovered, causing him to look at her with deep concern. A soft, quick escapes Nina as a thin trail of dark poison begins to leak from her nose and mouth. A heavy thud sounding occurs as Nina collapses to the ground, leaving Jean reeling in absolute shock and horror. Inside the infirmary, Cyril tends to the unconscious Nina while Adrian, Louis, and another knight watch over her with worry. Cyril reassures the group that Nina's constitution is remarkably strong and she will recover quickly from this level of poison. A soft, quick pew escapes Jean as he expresses his relief while still wondering why Nina went scouting alone. Adrian questions Jean about the magic circle Nina mentioned, confirming they found it on the barrier but left it undisturbed. Adrian stares into the distance, contemplating the terrifying significance of a hostile magic circle appearing directly on their defensive barrier. A vision of a woman in mourning clothes represents the shadowy enemies who have remained hidden since their son's funeral. Adrian wonders if his family's ancient enemies have finally begun their move to destroy everything he has built. His pink eyes glint with a grim intensity as he silently prepares himself for the coming confrontation with his past. Addressing the room, Adrian notes that while the enemy's objective remains unclear, the barrier's corruption is beyond their power. He decides their only option is to inform the temple, shifting the scene to a grand and gleaming white cathedral. Time passes peacefully in the infirmary as Nina rests, her breathing finally steady and the color returning to her face. Nina wakes up with a cheerful stretch, marveling at how well she slept despite her harrowing encounter in the woods. A sudden, sharp ack escapes Nina as a fist delivers a light, playful punch to her head for being such a sleepyhead. Cyril ignores her protests of violence, setting down a tray and ordering the grumbling Nina to eat her lunch. Cyril tells Nina to rest her injured ankle, explaining that the fortress is unusually quiet because there is no patrol today. Cyril reveals that after reporting the barrier issue Nina discovered, the temple immediately dispatched a priest to assist the order. Nina is visibly relieved by the news, though Cyril remains preoccupied as he checks his pocket watch and prepares to leave. While eating her soup, Nina reflects on her own lack of knowledge regarding magical barriers and her initial fear of failing. A sudden, quick tap sounding occurs as Nina freezes mid-bite, a terrifying realization regarding the original story's plot dawning upon her. A sudden, quick whoosh sounding occurs as Nina frantically leaps from her bed, screaming in realization that she has made a mistake. A series of dull thuds sounding occurs as Nina limps toward the door on her bandaged leg, ignoring Cyril's confused shouts. Nina curses her own forgetfulness as she recalls that the true final boss of the entire story is the High Priest. A series of loud crashes sounding occurs as a window shatters and papers fly, the fortress suddenly coming under a violent attack. Nina screams for Adrian as she gazes out the shattered window at a massive pillar of dark energy erupting nearby. She blames her own carelessness for allowing the enemy to infiltrate the heart of their home through the guise of aid. The horrifying truth is fully revealed as the High Priest is identified as the true architect behind the impending disaster. Cyril catches up to the panicked Nina in the room, demanding to know what has caused her sudden, desperate outburst. A sudden, quick whoosh sounding occurs as Nina orders Cyril to evacuate the people before she charges out into the chaos. With her hair flying behind her, Nina sprints toward the source of the disaster with fierce and desperate determination. Cyril stands frozen in shock, watching the young girl charge toward a battle he does not yet fully understand. Nina summons her wind magic once more, soaring through the air while crying out Adrian's name in distress. A series of loud crashes sounding occurs as the dark energy beam intensifies and shadows swarm the fortress grounds. A loud, sharp screech sounding occurs as monstrous Balacs and swarms of bats descend upon the unsuspecting and terrified knights. A sudden, sharp clang sounding occurs as Jean fights for his life against an endless wave of shadow monsters and bats. A soft, quick gasp escapes the blood-spattered Jean as he realizes the sheer number of enemies is completely overwhelming them. Trapped and exhausted, Jean prays for just one more person to stand beside him in the face of certain death. Nina arrives like a whirlwind, unleashing a freezing blast of ice and wind that shatters the monstrous Balacs around Jean. With her face splattered in purple blood and eyes wide with intensity, Nina apologizes to Jean for being so late. She frantically asks for the young master's location, and Jean grimly points toward the fallen commander across the bloody battlefield. A soft, quick huh escapes Nina as she turns her gaze toward the site of the devastating defeat she failed to prevent. Nina screams in agony as she sees Louis cradling the unconscious and bloodied body of Adrian on the ruined ground. Nina spins around in shock as a frantic warning about a threat behind her echoes through the air. A massive, scaly tentacle lashes out, but Nina expertly parries the strike with her gleaming blade. A soft, quick gasp escapes Nina as she sustains a small cut, blood trickling down her cheek. Nina's boots slam onto the fleshy creature as she expresses her disbelief at the sheer insanity of the battle. The battlefield becomes a chaotic blur as Nina dodges through a flurry of massive, lashing tentacles. Gathering her strength, Nina lets out a fierce battle cry, calling for everyone to stand with her. Nina plunges her sword into the beast's heart, unleashing a massive explosion of frost and ice. Breathless and bloodied, Nina realizes her body is pushed to its absolute limit after the brutal exchange. Nina surveys the crumbling barrier, noting that Balacs will swarm the fortress if the other side collapses. A sudden, low vibration rumbles through the air, signaling the imminent and total failure of the magical shield. Jean raises his blood-stained polearm, shouting for all remaining knights to gather around him for a final stand. Nina closes her eyes, focusing her remaining mana to call upon the power of the north wind. She chants a powerful spell, manifesting a massive, glittering ice dome to shield her comrades from the onslaught. The magical energy hums with intensity as the barrier of frost settles over the exhausted group. Jean notes the lethal poisonous miasma filling the air, while Louis checks on the heavily injured young master. Louis supports the weakened and bloodied Adrien, desperately asking if he still remains conscious through the pain. Adrien gazes at Nina with concern, while she remains focused on their survival despite her own injuries. Stumbling and pale, Adrien insists he is fine, though he can barely stand without Louis's constant support. Nina recalls the hidden threat, identifying a treacherous apostate who had been lurking within the temple's ranks. Adrien remembers how the disguised priest lured him to the barrier under the false pretense of requiring aid. He recalls listening to the traitors chanting without a single shred of doubt or suspicion in his heart. The memory shifts to a blinding, violent explosion that devastated the area and caught the squad off guard. Thick, poisonous smoke spread instantly, causing the entire nightly squad to collapse in a state of helplessness. Adrien's pink eyes fill with tears of regret as he blames himself for his foolish and costly decision. Nina stares at Adrien with a heavy, somber expression, realizing the weight of the sacrifice ahead. She gently takes Adrien's hand, offering him a sad but comforting smile amidst the ruin and smoke. Nina commands Jean and Louis to evacuate the young master immediately, leaving her behind to finish the task. Jean protests vehemently, refusing to abandon her to such a dangerous fate in the heart of the forest. Deep cracks spread rapidly across the ice shield, indicating that their temporary protection is nearly at its end. Nina reveals her plan to summon a higher-grade spirit, leaving Adrien stunned by the dangerous magnitude of her decision. She explains that borrowing a supreme spirit's power is the only way to mend the fractured barrier now. Jean is visibly confused, having never realized that spirit summoners possessed such a terrifying and potent ability. A conceptual image of scales emphasizes the grim reality. Summoning an uncontracted spirit requires a heavy, equal price. Adrien stares into the darkness, his expression hardening as he understands the terrible cost Nina intends to pay. A vision of Nina as a sacrificial figure appears, highlighting the requirement of offering one's own body. The weight of the sacrifice hangs heavy as Nina prepares to give everything to save her found family. Nina smiles sadly, insisting that this desperate gamble is the only way to save everyone from the miasma. Jean and Louis look on in horror as Nina declares she won't allow them all to die together. Nina takes a firm, determined step forward, her bloodied boots crunching against the frost-covered earth. Adrien declares he will be the one to perform the summons, since he is also a spirit wielder. Adrien stumbles weakly, nearly falling into Nina's arms as he tells the others to evacuate with her. Nina gazes at him with pity, noting that he is far too intoxicated by the poison to act. She firmly grasps his hand, her touch grounding him even as the world continues to crumble around them. Adrien refuses to leave, stating they will die together, but Nina insists he must live to report the disaster. She questions what would happen to the surviving knights if they were seen as having abandoned their commander. Nina leans close to Adrien, offering a gentle and peaceful hug as her final gift of comfort. Her blood-spattered face is filled with a serene, heartbreaking joy as she says her silent goodbyes. Adrien looks at her in stunned silence, his pink eyes reflecting a mix of sorrow, love, and desperation. A soft, quick escapes the conflicted Adrien as he struggles to comprehend why he should care for others. Nina holds his hands with unwavering devotion, her smile glowing with the light of her final, selfless resolve. Adrien desperately pleads for Nina not to leave him behind as their hands slowly drift apart in the light. The black-haired man remains alone, lamenting that such words only deepen the pain of their inevitable and cruel separation. A sudden, sharp grab sounding occurs as hands clasp together tightly, representing a final and desperate moment of physical connection. Jean and Louis urge the wounded commander to evacuate, though his focus remains entirely on Nina's tragic and noble fate. Adrien watches in horror as the protective field shatters, realizing Nina is staying behind to face the overwhelming darkness alone. Standing amidst the falling debris, Nina gazes out with a peaceful yet somber expression as her orange hair flutters softly. With purple blood on her cheek, Nina offers a cheerful peace sign and a bright smile as her final goodbye. A desperate, echoing scream of Nina's name fills the air as the magical energy begins to consume the entire battlefield. Nina entrusts herself to the spirit of the North Wind while watching her friends being teleported to safety by magic. Preparing for her final stand, Nina resolves to give one last push against the swarming shadow monsters and dark energy. A low, deep vibration sounding occurs as a massive red creature emerges from the cracks in the failing magical barrier. Leaning heavily on her sword, the exhausted Nina mocks the monster's impatience for its own inevitable and total destruction. The air crackles with heat as Nina begins to invoke the power of the scorching flame to incinerate her enemies. Nina offers her body and blood as a sacrifice, her eyes glowing with the intensity of the forbidden magical ritual. A celestial golden hand descends toward the small figure of Nina, marking the arrival of a supreme and terrifying power. Despite the blood and the overwhelming weight of her sacrifice, Nina's face is alight with a serene and loving smile. A sudden, sharp clang sounding occurs as Nina plunges her blade into the earth, finalizing the dangerous and life-altering contract. She offers her very soul upon the burning altar, surrendering everything to ensure the safety of her beloved family. Ancient runes glow with blinding intensity as the forbidden magic takes hold of the devastated and blood-soaked battlefield. With glowing orange eyes and a fierce smirk, Nina prepares to unleash the full magnitude of her supreme spirit's power. A radiant, divine light envelops Nina, erasing the darkness of the forest with its overwhelming and holy brilliance. Closing her eyes, Nina allows herself to be completely consumed by the white-hot energy of the ancient fire spirit. A massive, earth-shaking explosion of golden light erupts, purging the miasma and monsters from the area in a single blast. The blinding pillar of light is seen for miles, a sun-like beacon appearing in the heart of the dead night. The teleportation spell successfully whisks the three knights away from the center of the devastating and world-changing magical blast. They crash into the grass of a distant forest, safe from the explosion, but emotionally broken by their heavy loss. Adrian collapses onto the forest floor, his body trembling with the weight of grief and absolute physical exhaustion. A haunting vision of Nina reminds the commander that a spirit's failure signals the permanent end for its chosen master. Adrian slams his fist into the dirt, screaming in agony over the promises Nina could not keep in the end. He recalls a tender memory of Nina shielding him, a painful reminder of her lifelong devotion and ultimate final sacrifice. Jean and Louise stand silently over their broken leader, the gravity of their survival feeling like a heavy, undeserved curse. Louis suggests returning to the castle, but Adrian refuses to move while his heart remains with Nina in the forest. Pointing toward the village, Adrian orders the activation of the Great Barrier to stop the escaping and dangerous shadow beasts. Jean is visibly confused, unable to comprehend the commander's sudden shift toward strategic duties amidst such a personal tragedy. The red-haired knight argues that they must return to the blast site immediately to search for any sign of Nina. Adrian's gaze turns cold and distant as he declares Nina will return to him, no matter the cost or time. Jean watches his commander with growing dread, sensing a dark and dangerous change taking root in Adrian's grieving soul. Covered in blood and staggering under his own resolve, Adrian walks alone toward his next objective in the dark woods. Adrian swears a dark oath of vengeance against those who took Nina, his heart turning toward cold and obsessive darkness. A soft, quick whoosh sounding occurs as the last embers of the golden light fade into the silent night sky. Adrian returns to the barrier site, beginning the grueling process of casting a massive ward over the entire village area. Jean and Louis join Cyril in the village, fighting off monsters while directing terrified and fleeing refugees to safety. When the long night ends, the men return to the forest only to find a scorched and completely empty crater. In the center of the ruins, Nina's radiant sword stands alone as the only remnant of her noble existence. The knights weep before the silent blade, mourning the brave girl who gave everything to give them a future. As peace returns, a strange and miraculous rumor begins to spread through the rebuilding and quiet village streets. People recall the terrifying night the barrier fell and the darkness that nearly swallowed their entire world whole. Survivors describe seeing a second sun rise in the forest, an impossible light that brought them hope and salvation. They speak of a blinding brilliance so pure and powerful that no mortal eye could bear to look directly at it. In a distant sun-drenched field, a young girl with orange hair wakes up, blinking in wonder at the bright world. Nina wakes up in a sun-drenched field, startled by a voice calling her name against a clear blue sky. Looking up, Nina sees a man and a woman standing in a beautiful flower-filled meadow beneath her. Nina recognizes them as her sister and brother, both smiling warmly at her in this peaceful dreamscape. Her brother places a flower crown on her head, asking if she enjoyed her time away from them. Tears fill Nina's eyes as her brother compliments her beauty, calling her their precious youngest sibling. A loud "wah" sounding occurs as Nina begins to sob, overwhelmed by the warmth of seeing her family. Her sister and brother kneel beside her in the grass, offering a comforting hug to soothe her. As Nina is embraced, her sister marvels at how much she has grown and how heavy she is. Deeply emotional, Nina continues to cry while buried in her sister's arms, overwhelmed by this unexpected reunion. The three siblings share a tender group hug in the vibrant field, cherishing this rare moment of togetherness. Her sister and brother speak softly, telling Nina they always knew her heart without needing any words. An outstretched hand reaches toward Nina as her brother invites her to return home with them forever. Nina stares at the hand with a somber, tearful gaze, her heart heavy with a difficult choice ahead. In a dark, monochromatic space, Nina realizes she cannot abandon her friend Adrian or leave him alone. Nina looks at her sister, admitting she can't return to the past when they were all together. She watches her siblings sadly, resolving that she won't go back because her place is now with Adrian. Nina offers a final, cheerful smile to her family, finding the strength to say goodbye to her dream. Standing between her brother and sister, Nina thanks the unknown force that granted her this beautiful dream. A command to come out echoes as Nina prepares to leave the flower field and face reality. The vision of her family in the field transforms into a book, signifying the end of the memory. Glowing blue runes flutter through the air as the pages of the magical book turn and fade away. Nina stands alone in a grand, ethereal hall, her orange hair tied back as she holds a bouquet. Two massive, divine figures appear before Nina, one clad in fire and the other in icy white armor. The fire spirit explains that Nina's memories were briefly mixed while they were examining the state of her soul. The golden-clad spirit reaches out, gently touching Nina's face as she asks if she feels any discomfort. Nina smiles brightly, dismissing the concern and expressing how happy she was to see her siblings again. Looking at the towering figures, Nina wonders if these non-human beings are the spirits she tried to summon. A quick ahem sounding occurs as Nina nervously asks if they have ever met each other before. Nina frantically waves her hands, clarifying that she isn't flirting but simply finds their presence incredibly familiar. A soft mumble sounding occurs as the white-armored spirit notes that this is the first time she's reacted this way. Nina is confused, asking what he means by first time, prompting the spirits to admit their own surprise. The fire spirit's face is partially veiled, her red lips curving into a mysterious and knowing smile. The armored spirit explains that while others demand fallen spirits or worse, Nina's request was quite unique. Nina nods along before suddenly realizing the weight of their words, her expression turning into a shocked shout. Panic sets in as Nina realizes she is alive, hoping this isn't some fatal twist where she can't return. The white-armored spirit smiles, revealing they bent the rules because they were moved by Nina's sacrificial heart. Joy explodes from Nina as she jumps and cheers, celebrating the fact that she isn't actually dead. Nina turns around quickly, her orange pigtails flying as she prepares to ask her next important question. The two supreme spirits stand together, a contrast of burning fire and freezing ice, awaiting Nina's reaction. The spirits glance at each other, their silent exchange suggesting a deep and ancient bond between their powers. A frantic Nina apologizes profusely, admitting she has no idea who they are or how they arrived. Nina pauses, guessing that the fire spirit might represent the sun based on her radiant, burning appearance. A conceptual image shows the word sun over a bright orb, representing the identity of the fire spirit. The fire spirit nods in confirmation, her golden armored hand resting against her chest in a regal gesture. Nina turns her attention to the armored figure, questioning if he is the spirit she remembers as an ally. She recalls the power of the north wind and frost, visualizing the small fairies that once aided her. Nina looks at the towering knight, wondering if he is the personified version of those icy shield spirits. The spirit confirms her guess of winter, his helmeted face offering a gentle and approving smile. Nina laughs awkwardly, scratching her head while apologizing for not recognizing her powerful, longtime guardian sooner. Suddenly, Nina clutches her face in horror, realizing that identifying spirits is definitely not the current priority. Nina clutches her face in absolute shock, screaming in disbelief as the reality of her situation finally sinks in. A narrative panel explains that higher-ranked spirits embody more concepts, making sun and winter top-tier deities comparable to gods. Nina looks up in awe at the massive, divine figures, realizing she summoned actual personifications of the sun and winter. Nina's glowing silhouette floats within a massive, golden magical circle as her soul undergoes a complex reconstruction by the spirits. Winter explains from behind his icy visor that he successfully prevented Nina's soul from suffering any permanent damage. Standing in a simple white gown, Nina listens as the armored spirit notes that reconstructing her body will take time. Nina smiles nervously, a bead of sweat on her face as she wonders just how long the process will actually take. Nina bows respectfully to her guardians, thanking them and deciding to take it easy while she waits for her return. Sun smirks behind her veil, her clawed golden fingers glowing with magical energy as she prepares a surprise for her contractor. A sudden, quick bang sounding occurs as Nina is teleported to a training field, left bewildered by the sudden change. Sun materializes a massive, radiant blade, cheerfully offering to teach Nina some elite swordsmanship while they wait for her body. Nina's cartoonish chibi form trembles in terror as Sun darkly declares that refusing the training is simply not an option. Nina lets out a shocked shout as she finds herself alone in a vast field filled with wooden mannequins and swords. Beaten to the brink of death and smoking from exhaustion, Nina collapses face first into the dirt of the training ground. Nina pleads for death, but Sun ignores her, surrounded by sparkling green healing crosses while preparing Nina for another brutal round. Time passes in a blur as Nina continues her grueling training, losing all track of time in the eternal sunlit realm. Crying and overwhelmed, Nina screams that this divine training is 1,000 times harder than life in the Black Knight Order. While Nina struggles against a wooden mannequin in the background, Sun relaxes at a table, casually observing her progress. Sun sips tea and dismisses Nina's hard-won skills as barely decent, prompting a furious and insulted reaction from the exhausted girl. Nina rants about the many skills she has mastered, but Sun slams her hand down, demanding absolute perfection from her contractor. Sun explains that as the contractor of Sun and Winter, Nina must be the absolute best, leaving no room for failure. Nina grumbles about the high standards of top-tier spirits as Sun teases her with the promise of some impending good news. Startled, Nina's eyes go wide with hope as she asks if the good news means she is finally going back. Nina stands before the two giants as a bright, ethereal light begins to envelop the hall, signaling her final departure. Winter watches as Nina prepares to leave, noting that her reconstructed body is significantly more durable and sturdier than before. Nina weeps tears of joy, shouting, "Freedom!" as she is finally released from Sun's relentless and brutal training regime. A quick, hum sounding occurs as Winter explains that her body's increased durability was a necessary part of the reconstruction process. Nina is shocked by the implication, wondering if she has changed so much that her own people won't recognize her. Nina accepts the inevitable change with a small smile, hoping her new appearance consists of at least pretty colors. A narrative warning appears, explaining that time in this realm flows differently, and 2 years have passed in the world. A glowing notification clarifies that about 2 years will have passed since the day of the explosion when she wakes. Nina gasps in relief, admitting she was terrified that a whole century might have passed while she was training with Sun. The spirits share a silent, awkward glance as Nina questions their reaction, realizing her guess might have been closer than she thought. Winter urges Nina to hurry back to her worried friends, commending her for the hard work she endured during her stay. Nina offers a soft, grateful smile, acknowledging that despite the hardships, it was a joy to be with the spirits. Sun reassures Nina that they will always be by her side, even if they are no longer visible to her eye. Nina closes her eyes and takes a deep breath, preparing to exhale and cross the threshold back into reality. Sun asks Nina if she is curious about why she possesses those specific ancient memories from her past lives. Nina keeps her eyes closed, peacefully stating that she doesn't need to know the reason because she already feels the answer. Nina smiles radiantly, admitting the answer is obvious as she begins to fade away into a field of yellow flowers. Sun smiles knowingly, concluding that Nina's simple and pure response is the most fitting answer she could have given. Swirling white energy and glowing sparkles surround Nina's long hair as she fully rematerializes back into the physical world. Nina's hair has turned silvery white, and her eyes have become a vibrant golden hue after her divine 2-year rebirth. Looking down at her new form, Nina's hands glow with a faint light as she realizes how much she has changed. A loud "Whoa! Whoa!" sounding occurs as Nina's sudden return startles the birds in the dark and silent forest night. Nina cheers and dances in the forest, celebrating her return and thanking Sun and Winter for finally bringing her back. Examining her reflection, Nina marvels at her silvery hair and golden eyes, realizing her appearance truly has been completely transformed. She recalls her old, poisoned body, contrasting its messy state with her new, incredibly strong and newly made form. Nina looks up at a massive, glowing barrier in the sky, realizing the spirits helped seal the collapse 2 years ago. Standing before the towering figures in her mind, Nina whispers a final thank you for their incredible sacrifice and guidance. Looking up at the night sky, Nina's newly transformed golden eyes shimmer with a soft, ethereal light. Standing alone under the stars, Nina reflects on the 2 years she spent away, feeling the surreal weight of her return. Re-evaluating the original story, Chibi Nina worries that the villainous scheme against the knights has already led Adrian into darkness. Nina recalls a grim vision of Adrian standing amidst blood, determined to prevent him from staining his family's blood. Shaking off her heavy thoughts, the silver-haired girl turns away with a frustrated cry, unable to find clear answers. Memories of the vibrant night order flash by, contrasting the sunny training fields with her current solitary night in the woods. Chanting a familiar spell, Nina summons the north wind, her body surging with a powerful, green, magical energy. Nina marvels at the strength of her magic, noticing it feels far more potent and natural than it did before her rebirth. A wave of excitement washes over her as she spots a distant fortress looming beyond the dense, dark tree line. The sudden sighting of Belix attacking the fortress in the dead of night prompts a shocked and urgent reaction from Nina. Monstrous winged lions rain fire down upon the walls, turning the night sky into a chaotic, burning inferno of destruction. Sprinting toward the danger, Nina condemns the underhanded monsters for launching a cowardly raid while the soldiers are likely asleep. Desperate for a way to fight back, she scans the forest floor for anything that could serve as a temporary weapon. Grabbing a sturdy branch, Nina leaps into the air, propelled upward by a massive, spiraling gust of green wind magic. Soaring high above the burning battlefield, Nina is thrilled by her incredible jumping height as she prepares her descent. Glowing fairies and butterflies surround Nina as she realizes her soul and magic now move in perfect divine harmony. With a determined smile and her makeshift wooden sword in hand, Nina declares that it is finally time to begin the battle. Lunging from the sky, Nina strikes down the first flying monster with a blinding flash of green energy and power. She spins gracefully through the air, the wind carrying her effortlessly as she seeks out her next target. A loud, crushing sounding occurs as Nina slams into a second beast, her raw power easily overwhelming the creature's defenses. Floating amidst the swirling magical aura, Nina admits that the battle feels surprisingly easy after her grueling years of training. A weeping chibi Nina thanks Sun, realizing the 100 years of hellish training were actually worth the immense power she now wields. Her golden eyes narrow with focused intent as she decides to quickly eliminate the remaining monsters threatening the fortress. Descending rapidly, she notices a small group of people standing on the ground below, right in the path of the chaos. Nina shouts a loud, encouraging greeting as she dives toward the Obsidian Knights, eager to show off her new skills and help. She effortlessly dodges a blast of dragon-like fire, teasingly noting that the monster's attacks are a piece of cake for her now. A sudden, confusing moment occurs as Nina realizes her movements have become slightly tangled in her own magical energies. Gravity takes over as Nina begins to fall, while a tiny, frantic Sun scolds her for losing her calm during the fight. From the shadows, a dark-gloved hand reaches out, summoning a terrifying wave of purple, shadowy energy into the night. Dark chains erupt from the gloom, instantly devouring the remaining monster as a shocked Nina watches from the ground below. Nina lands softly amidst a flurry of glowing green butterflies, the forest floor lighting up as her magic slowly dissipates. Slumping over in embarrassment, Nina laments her failed entrance while the knights approach her with bewildered expressions. Crouched on the grass, she looks up and finds herself staring at a very familiar figure standing right in front of her. Nina's face flushes as she gazes at him, her golden eyes widening with a mix of joy and nervous anticipation. Adrian stands tall in his regal blue and gold uniform, his dark hair framed by the moonlight as he looks down at her. Overwhelmed with happiness, Nina breaks into a radiant, beaming smile as she is finally reunited with the person she missed most. A loud, piercing screeching sounding occurs as the Knight Commander receives word of an A-rank monster threat near the fortress. Adrian and his loyal commanders prepare their horses, staying alert for an enemy force that far exceeds the initial reports. Looking grim and determined, the black-haired leader notes that the three of them must find a way to stop the raid. A sudden, sharp stopping occurs as Adrian and his companion freeze in their tracks, distracted by something unbelievable in the sky. The red-haired knight points a trembling finger toward the battlefield, his face pale with utter shock at what he sees. Adrian watches in silence as the mysterious, silver-haired girl dances through the air, effortlessly defeating the monsters they feared. A profound sense of realization fills the air as the narrator questions if that incredible person is really the one they lost. Adrian's stoic mask shatters, his eyes reflecting a deep well of emotion and disbelief as he finally recognizes the girl. Approaching the fallen girl, Adrian offers a gentle greeting, softly asking if he has arrived a little late to save her. Nina laughs awkwardly while scratching her cheek, playfully retorting that 2 years is quite a bit more than just a little late. A sudden, tight lunging occurs as Adrian pulls Nina into a desperate, crushing hug, unwilling to let her go again. Shaking with emotion, he repeatedly whispers her name as Nina realizes the true depth of the pain her absence caused. Tears stream down Adrian's face as he looks at her, his voice breaking as he questions how she could have stayed away. Adrian reflects on the day of the explosion, standing before the glowing remnants of the shield that took her away from him. A bittersweet memory of Adrian holding the younger, orange-haired version of Nina highlights the crushing loneliness he felt. In the present, Adrian pulls the silver-haired Nina into a desperate hug, his voice trembling with years of suppressed pain. Nina gently cradles Adrian's face as tears stream down his cheeks, her soft Adrian breaking through his emotional wall. Looking up with a radiant smile, Nina's golden eyes shimmer with the joy of finally being back in his arms. Adrian gazes into her eyes with disbelief, his voice soft and relieved as he finally accepts that she has returned. Sitting together on the cool grass, Adrian holds Nina as if the 2 years apart were just a fading nightmare. Nearby, the red-haired knight Jin breaks down into loud, messy sobs, unable to contain his overwhelming relief and sorrow. A sudden, sharp guk sounding occurs as Jin grabs Nina, shaking her vigorously while calling her a complete idiot. Nina laughs as Jin continues to cry, teasingly noting that the red-haired knight's strength and dramatic personality remain unchanged. Wiping his eyes, Jin points toward the blonde vice commander as Nina offers a warm greeting to a smiling Louis. Louis kindly checks if Nina is injured, but she cheerfully assures him that she is in perfect health after the fight. Nina's eyes sparkle with pure excitement as Louis asks what happened, realizing she finally has an audience for her story. Nina commands everyone's attention, proudly preparing to recount the incredible and difficult trials she endured during her long spiritual journey. Sitting at a table inside the fortress, Nina details her century of training with the high-rank spirits, Sun and Winter. Jin finds the story of a 100-year training session so absurd and terrifying that it literally gives him physical goosebumps. Watching Chibi Nina eat, Jin concludes that since she can still enjoy bread, she definitely isn't a lingering ghost. Nina pauses mid-bite, realization dawning on her that she actually went 100 years without needing food or sleep. A sudden wave of exhaustion hits the silver-haired girl, and she rubs her eyes as sleepiness finally begins to take hold. Adrian suggests they all get some rest, noting that they must return to the castle tomorrow after such a long night. With a tender look, Adrian promises Nina that they will have all the time in the world to be together. Nina pumps her fists with a fiery, determined expression, clearly energized by the thought of her upcoming life at home. Much to the knight's confusion, Nina excitedly suggests they all sleep in one room, comparing it to a summer camp. The four companions lie side by side on the floor of the grand hall, moonlight casting long shadows across the quiet room. Jin begins talking loudly in his sleep about increasing the food budget for Nina, while Louis sleepily rejects the idea. Nina giggles quietly to herself while resting her head on her hand, remembering how Jin always talked in his sleep. Gazing out with a peaceful smile, Nina's golden eyes reflect the deep contentment she feels being back with her friends. She turns her gaze toward the sleeping man beside her, her heart swelling with affection for the black-haired leader. Looking closely at Adrian, Nina realizes his face has lost its youthful traces, showing the weight of the years he spent alone. She reflects on the lonely path Adrian walked during their separation, imagining her past self walking away from his solitary figure. Nina thinks to herself that all the years of hellish training were worth it just to return to Adrian's side. Exhaustion finally overcomes her, and Nina drifts off into a deep sleep while lying close to the black-haired man. Adrian watches her sleep in the soft light, his thoughts drifting toward how much her hair has grown since they parted. Reflecting on her story, Adrian's heart sinks as he wonders if Nina ever thought about giving up during those long years. A shadow of doubt crosses Adrian's mind as he questions whether Nina secretly resented him while she was away training. The group sleeps peacefully amidst a dreamlike aura of flowers, wishing for their shared time together to be very long. Adrian wakes up with a start and finds the hall empty, his heart racing as he calls out Nina's name. Light floods the room as Nina pulls back the white curtains, the morning sun casting a brilliant glow over everything. Nina turns around with a bright, cheerful expression, teasingly asking the young master if he is finally awake and ready. Standing in the sunlight, Nina offers a radiant "good morning" that immediately calms Adrian's lingering fears and racing heart. A quick, sharp tuck-tuck sounding occurs as Nina hurries toward him, concerned by the cold sweat on Adrian's forehead. The two share an intimate, lingering look in the bright morning light, the reality of their reunion finally sinking in. Later that morning, the group rides through the forest, with Nina sitting securely on the horse behind the black-haired man. Nina questions why only the three of them came to the fortress, prompting a response from the blonde vice commander. Louis explains that they plan to handle the raid with a small elite force to minimize damage to the territory. Nina reacts with sudden, wide-eyed shock as Louis mentions a certain title, shouting for the group to wait a moment. Pointing a trembling finger, Nina asks if Adrian was the one Louis referred to as His Highness during the conversation. Adrian looks back at her with a calm and steady expression, confirming that he has indeed officially become a duke. Nina offers a stunned congratulations while her mind reels, struggling to process the massive changes that occurred in her absence. A frantic Chibi Nina is left in a state of utter confusion, wondering how on earth the story changed so much. Torn pages of the original story drift through the air, signifying that Nina's return has completely shattered the pre-written fate. a grim flashback reveals a blood-stained Adrian standing amidst a battlefield, his sword dripping with the weight of recent violence. Back in the present, the red-haired knight Jin recalls the terrifying intensity of the young master's rage following the barrier incident. Memories shift to a tense confrontation in the conference hall, where the black-haired leader pointed his blade at a cowering official. Nina's eyes bulge in pure shock as she learns that Adrian actually drew his sword against his own allies in her absence. As the group continues their ride, the blonde Vice Commander Louis tries to ease her mind, claiming Jin is merely exaggerating. Despite the reassurance, a frantic Nina realizes something truly drastic must have occurred to push the stoic Adrian to such extremes. Leaning back against him on the horse, Nina asks the black-haired man directly if the rumors about his outburst are true. Adrian remains silent, his gaze fixed forward as he avoids answering her question about the chaos that followed the barrier's collapse. Nina reflects on the heavy burden her friends carried, imagining her chibi companions exhausted by the sheer intensity of the past years. The silver-haired girl feels a pang of guilt, wondering how many more secrets her friends are keeping to protect her feelings. Riding together in silence, the physical closeness between Nina and the Duke offers a sharp contrast to the dark stories being shared. Flashbacks show Adrian and his loyal commanders being surrounded by a sea of hostile escort knights during a past confrontation. Adrian's expression softens for a moment as he admits that Nina's final words were the only thing that kept him sane. A bittersweet memory of a younger, orange-haired Nina embracing Adrian highlights the deep emotional anchor she provided long before their separation. Following his return to the Black Shield Fortress, the determined leader began the arduous task of reorganizing the legendary Obsidian Knights. Louis details the group's many brushes with death, noting that their survival felt like a miraculous escape from a living hell. The narrative takes a somber turn as a purple, malevolent sky signals the arrival of a devastating plague across the empire. Torn puzzle pieces of the original story suggest that the second male lead's past was far darker than any book could record. Closing his eyes, Louis explains that the plague claimed the lives of both the former duke and his young heir, leaving Adrian. Jin adds that the Duchess shamelessly plotted with the duke's younger brother before the mourning period for her husband had even finished. Trapped at a funeral, Adrian and his commanders faced immediate betrayal as the greedy Duchess ordered their imprisonment within the estate. Nina listens intently as Louis confirms that this treachery was the catalyst for the bloody power struggle that defined Adrian's rise. Blood splatters across an empty, ornate throne, symbolizing the violent succession struggle that tore the Rouvain family apart from within. On a symbolic chessboard, a few black pieces stand defiant against a massive, overwhelming army of white pieces, representing the treacherous vassals. Looking like a demon with glowing red eyes, Adrian grips a black knight, prepared to sacrifice everything to reclaim his stolen birthright. The tide of the game shifts abruptly as the white pieces are scattered and broken, signifying the total defeat of Adrian's enemies. After 6 months of bloodshed, a weary Adrian finally claimed the throne, ascending to the title of Duke amidst a crimson-stained hall. A ferocious, glowing-eyed tiger charges through the darkness, representing the destructive path Adrian walked until the moment Nina finally returned. A brilliant celestial light breaks through the gloom, heralding the return of the only person capable of calming the Duke's inner beast. Nina looks up at Adrian with a mix of awe and sorrow, finally understanding the true cost of his survival and newfound power. She nods slowly, her golden eyes wide as she processes the sheer volume of tragedy and triumph that unfolded during her absence. Nina finds a small comfort in knowing that Adrian avoided kinslaying and that their core group of knights managed to endure. Her mood shifts to playful excitement as she imagines living a life of luxury using the ducal family's vast wealth and lands. The group arrives at the Black Shield Fortress, but Nina's dreams of grandeur shatter upon seeing the crumbling, cobweb-infested ruins of the estate. A sudden, sharp crack sounding occurs as Nina's enthusiasm literally turns to stone, while her two commanders look on with pity. Surveying the dilapidated entryway and the lone falling leaf, a devastated Nina questions just how poor they have actually become. From the shadows of the ruin, a gray-haired woman named Kirill emerges with a warm, welcoming smile for the long-lost girl. Nina collapses onto the dusty floor in a fit of dramatic despair, her cries echoing through the empty, impoverished hall. Tears stream down the silver-haired girl's face as the harsh reality of her rich new life begins to truly sink in. Lunging forward, Nina pulls Kirill into a desperate, tearful hug, begging for some sign of hope in this destitute fortress. Sitting at a bare wooden table, Louis delivers the final blow, explaining that Adrian inherited massive debts and barren, unproductive farmland. Clinging to Kirill's arm, Nina frantically asks if there is any allowance left, suggesting they grow expensive herbs to save their finances. Kirill agrees to the plan, but casts a wary look toward the men, asking if they have revealed the other piece of bad news. The three companions huddled together to whisper in secret, leaving a suspicious and terrified Nina to imagine the absolute worst. Wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead, the red-haired knight Jin nervously confesses the truth. There is actually no land left. Nina stands frozen in horror as she learns that the former duke gambled away or lost a full third of their territory. A sudden, soft flump sounding occurs as Nina faints onto the table, her spirit seemingly leaving her body in total defeat. Louis attempts to soothe the unconscious girl, gently explaining the complicated history of the territory's decline to her limp form. A quick, bright ding sounding occurs as Nina revives, her memory sparked by the mention of the prestigious knight exchange matches. The scene shifts to show arrogant rival knights, highlighting how the Obsidian Knights were unfairly excluded and marginalized for many years. Nina remarks on the territory's history of constant losses, while an old, tattered flag lies on the ground. Louis explains that the enemy gains usage rights from matches, with ownership transferring after 10 consecutive years of occupation. Distraught by the former duke's foolish gambling, Nina fumes over the debt he used to justify the reckless deal. Staring blankly, the silver-haired girl realizes that rebuilding a territory is impossible if they have no land to start with. A map illustrates the shrinking borders, highlighting the danger of the Rouvain family losing their prestigious ducal title entirely. Feeling the weight of the situation, Nina looks down in despair, wondering if there is any way to save them. A realization suddenly strikes Nina as she stands in the grand hall, remembering a crucial detail about the match timeline. Adrian looks up from his seat, confirming they still have 2 years left before the land ownership is permanently lost. The red-haired knight Jin remains pessimistic, noting that they are severely outnumbered and have almost no chance of victory. Nina's mood flips instantly to carefree joy as she cheers for more alcohol, much to the confusion of Jin. Jin explains that the rules required teams of 10, but most of their knights retired following the recent civil war. Resting her chin on her hand, the silver-haired girl flashes a confident, mischievous smile that glows with hidden intent. A hand firmly grips a wooden mug filled with amber liquid, emphasizing the group's shift toward a celebratory mood. With a determined glint in her golden eyes, Nina declares that she simply needs to win every single match. The three men stand in silent, bewildered shock, unable to comprehend Nina's sudden and overwhelming burst of absolute confidence. Adrian reflects on Nina's terrifyingly powerful combat performance from the previous day, realizing that her victory might actually be possible. Leaning back with a flush on her cheeks, Nina laughs heartily as the strong alcohol begins to take its toll. Slumping onto the table, the drunken girl mutters about her grand plans to make a fortune selling rare magical plants. Looking on with a tender and fond expression, the black-haired duke watches as Nina finally drifts off into sleep. Even in her sleep, Nina continues to giggle, her face bright red from the drink and the excitement of returning. Nina wakes up or reacts with a start, her eyes wide as the words "Knight Commander" echo in her ears. As Nina looks around in confusion, Adrian calmly asks the blonde vice commander to bring the items he requested earlier. A pair of hands presents a ceremonial red cushion, holding a collection of official-looking scrolls and sealed letters. Sitting across from the baffled girl, Adrian prepares to explain the contents of the complicated and numerous legal documents. Nina's eyes sparkle with golden light as she gazes intently at the black-haired man, hanging on his every word. Adrian looks directly at her with a serious expression, announcing his intent to officially appoint her to a new position. Presenting the scrolls on the cushion, Adrian formally names Nina as the commander of the legendary Obsidian Knight Order. Sweating profusely, Nina freezes in utter shock as she processes the immense responsibility suddenly thrust upon her shoulders. A massive, echoing scream of "What?" erupts from the fortress, shaking the very foundations of the estate into the night. Pointing frantically at the other knights, Nina demands to know why she was chosen over her far more experienced companions. Holding a mug with a polite smile, Louis explains that he prefers a civil role over a frontline military command. Jin shrugs nonchalantly, claiming that dealing with such a troublesome leadership position isn't suited to his blunt personality. Nina remains hesitant and worried, questioning if making such a monumental decision so suddenly is actually a good idea. Leaning forward with a warm and gentle smile, Adrian tells her that he could think of no one else for the job. Clutching her burning cheeks, Nina struggles to maintain her resolve, finding it impossible to refuse Adrian's charming, soft expression. Scratching her ear awkwardly, the silver-haired girl finally yields, though she insists on asking one final, important question. Nina questions the significance of her new middle name and fief, curious about what specific territory she now technically governs. Adrian lets out a soft laugh, explaining that her hereditary title comes with the family name Del and middle name La. To keep a powerful spirit knight by his side, Adrian insists that granting her a noble title is the absolute minimum. Clutching the scroll to her chest, Nina stands tall with a focused and serious expression, accepting her new noble destiny. A chibi Nina dances wildly with joy over being a noble, while the elder knight grumbles about her loud celebration. The gray-haired knight notes that the public currently views the Obsidian Order as villains, making Nina's appointment quite a shock. Striking a confident pose, Nina declares that if she cannot be a protagonist, she will happily be a cool villain. Jin laughs and calls for everyone to fill their glasses, eager to celebrate their new path as the story's protagonists. A loud, joyful clink sounding occurs as the four companions smash their wooden mugs together in a spirited midnight toast. Under the soft indoor light, the friends sit together as Adrian asks Nina to share stories of the spirits she met. The silver moon shines brightly over the Black Shield Fortress, casting a peaceful glow over the quiet, ancient stone walls. Waking up the next morning in a daze, Nina blinks against the light, trying to piece together the previous night. Gripping her throbbing head, Nina groans in pain as she struggles to recall the blurry events of their drunken celebration. Looking down at the official document in her hands, she sees the name Nina Ladell clearly inscribed in elegant script. Nina gazes at her new official documents, cherishing the very first surname and title she has ever received. The silver-haired girl reflects deeply on the fact that this precious new name was chosen specifically for her by Adrian. A serene smile touches Nina's lips as she realizes how much she truly loves her new identity and noble status. Moonlight spills through the open balcony doors as glowing, magical butterflies drift peacefully into the quiet, dark chamber. Seated alone at a chessboard, the black-haired Duke Adrian remains lost in thought amidst the stillness of the night. Moving to the window, Adrian draws back the thin curtains to gaze out at the beauty of the moonlit estate. A rare, soft expression of contentment settles on Adrian's face as he finds peace in the quiet moments of the night. Surrounded by a swarm of radiant butterflies, the silver-haired girl is warmly welcomed home to her new life at last.